Today, we're going to talk about Excel. We're going to talk about something really simple that you can integrate right now to help you with your spreadsheets and make things a little bit nicer and easier on you and on the people who follow you. And what I mean by that is the people who you hand your spreadsheets off to, because frankly, if I could go back in time and find some of the people that came up with these spreadsheets and get in front of them, I'd say, hey, look, like, can you just do some of these simple things to help when you pass this on? So today, we're going to talk about absolute, relative references, and the named range. By the way, I do want to call out the fact that things look a little bit different. I found my good camera. I also found a better arrangement. Yesterday was a little bit cramped, but at least, I just wanted to get a video out. And I cleaned up just a hair. Behind me, you'll notice this beautiful basement that I'm in. So without further ado, let's talk about the absolute and relative references and the named range. So to start out, what we have here is basically a table of numbers. This isn't anything special. These numbers have no real significance. It's just demonstration data. However, I do want you to pay attention to the fact that we have this additional field down here, which I'm actually going to go ahead and color gray just to make it obvious. So we have blue, red, yellow, and then an empty green field, and this X factor number down at the bottom, which will come into play later. So you are probably already familiar with what I'm about to show you because it's pretty much underpins what Excel is. You create a formula. This formula here, since we know that we've known this since we were little kids, green or blue plus yellow gives us green. So blue plus yellow gives us green. So we add those two together. We drag down using the autocomplete feature, and we get our numbers. Now, the way this works is that it uses what's called a relative reference. So I create this formula up here, and it says, okay, A2 plus C2 equals whatever. That's relative to the position because we are in field D2, right? As we move down, that's going to adjust. Now that we're in cell D3, it's going to adjust to be A3 and C3. That's by design. Again, it's what's known as a relative reference. Now, when we start to deal with things at higher complexities, we need to start thinking about what's called the absolute reference. Take a minute, think about what that means, and now I'm going to demonstrate. Basically, with this, an absolute reference refers to fixing one of those things, either the row, the column, or both, to a single reference or number or letter, and then the rest can move around it. I'll give you an example about this. What we're going to calculate now, we're going to go a little bit out there, and we're going to calculate green times x. Green times x. Well, let's do a calculation here. So we want green, right? We want to multiply green times x, which is down here, this 0.5. So now we end up with D2 times B14. Press enter, that gives us a number. That makes sense. 1.5, that's half of 3. Easy enough. Now I want to do that for everything. I want to have all these numbers cut in half based upon this factor that we set up here. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to drag this down. It's going to fail. The reason why it fails is because all of this is a relative reference. So let's look at that again and understand a little more about what that means. The relative reference means that it's D2 times B14 in relation to E2, which is where we are right now. So when I drag it down, can you guess what's going to happen? You guessed right. So now we're in field E3, and it is D3, which is good, which is correct, times B15, which is wrong. It's moved down one space with everything else, and we are in a zero. We're in a zero. It's a null field, so it's going to give us all zeros. So what do we do? Well, we're going to introduce the idea of an absolute reference. I'm going to delete these because they're useless. We're going to go ahead and modify this formula a little bit. So what I want you to do is you're going to sit on that B14, which is our reference to that X field. And I don't know what the equivalent is on Mac. I'll show you here. Push F4. When you push F4, it's going to add in some dollar signs. Those dollar signs are essentially telling Excel to fix that position. No matter what happens, don't leave column B and don't leave row 14. It's going to look the same for this first one, but then as we drag this down, we're going to notice that we had an impact. And the impact that we had was it's fixing it down on that X. So you'll see as we go down here, it's going to stay on that field down there while the D column moves down along with us. So that refers to as an absolute reference by cell and row, or sorry, by column and row. Now what we want to do is something a little bit different. Let's say we have another x value. Let's say, let's call it 0.3 in this case. I'm interested in what green is times 0.3. I think that'd be an interesting number to look at. So what are we going to do here? Okay, well, we have this formula, and we know that we can drag things around to help us. So let's drag this over and just see what happens. 0.75. Where is that coming from? I know for a fact that 1/3 of 3 is not 7.75. Let's open it up. Interesting. So what's happened is that E2, where we were in D2 before, it's moved over to the right with us, even though X has remained the same. The reason for that is because it's thinking, well, let's move over along with this and then have that cell reference follow us. It's not what we want. So let's modify this. What we're going to do is we're actually going to modify, we're going to go back, we're going to modify this original formula. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, let's get in here, let's look at what this is. No matter what happens, since these are two green fields, I don't want to leave column D no matter what. So I'm just going to go ahead and fix D, which is that $sign that precedes it. Fixes D, allows us to move around by row. This shouldn't change anything when we do it. It didn't change anything. Very cool. Okay, now when we want to drag this over, we're going to see 3 times something's wrong. What's wrong? Well, simple enough. The absolute reference that we created in the other column didn't move with us. So we need to make an adjustment to this B reference that leads down here to help us move over to C when we move over to the next column. Hopefully you're following me, and hopefully you're seeing what's about to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust this absolute reference we created earlier, and we're going to make it so it only moves via column and not row, because we want to make sure that it stays in row 14 down there, even though we want to get over to column C, because we're trying to get that value in C14. So what we're going to do is, again, we're going to use that F4 key again, and we're going to say, all right, allow me to change the column, but not the row. We're not going to fix B, we're going to leave that relative, but we're going to make 14 absolute and press enter. Shouldn't change anything. We'll drag this and autocomplete again. Everything looks good. Everything's the same. Now we're going to drag this across. And what you're going to find is this works exactly as we expect. We said, okay, allow us to move over one column, keep us in the same green column. Everything looks good. Awesome. And as we drag this down, it's going to give us the values we expect. Let's take a look. Looks good. Everything's in the same row. Everything's in the same column. We've moved over as expected. All these numbers look great. Awesome. Very nice. It worked out. That is what we use absolute and relative references for. It's a way of being able to navigate your data, create things that are more sophisticated and complex, and then you can, really kind of hook into the power of what you're doing. You can make, really sophisticated stuff. This is the furthest thing from sophisticated, but that's the idea. I want to show you one more thing before we're done. The last thing I want to show you is the notion of the named range. So the named range, if you have any experience with programming or machine intelligence, machine learning, whatever, the named range can somewhat be thought of as a variable, in the same way that a cell reference is in fact a variable. So A2, that is a variable. A2 is the variable because you're changing that all over and you have a reference for it. A2 equals 1. That's your variable. It can get a little confusing when we get at very high levels of complexity. So what we'll do instead is we'll add some readable names to some of these fields. I'm gonna go ahead and give you an example of what I mean by this. We're gonna call this X alpha, and we're gonna call this one X beta. Okay, alpha and beta. So we have X alpha, X beta. What I want to do though is I want to multiply green times alpha, and I want to do green. Green. This is what happens when you don't type like a normal person. This is what happens when you type like a dude who grew up playing StarCraft. So alpha, and green times beta. We can actually define what alpha and beta are in this spreadsheet, on this page, or in this workbook, however we want to do it. So what you'll do is you'll select the field that you want to assign a name to. Now, what I discovered in creating this video is that I can't actually show you the pop-ups and stuff when you right click and there's all those options that come down. But what I can show you is the really, really simple way to set these up for yourself. Here's how you do it. So you'll notice I'm in alpha, which is what, B14, whatever. If you look up at the top left of your screen, and this is for those of you using Excel, Microsoft Excel, I don't know if there, or sorry, whatever current version on PC, this is how this is going to work. So basically up here, this is the name box. This is the name area where it tells you what the name of that cell is. You can actually just click in there and change it. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this X alpha. I press enter, and now this is named X alpha, here and forevermore. Same thing we'll do for X beta. So I'm going to call this X underscore beta. X beta, here and forevermore. So now I've got alpha and beta, X alpha, X beta. Great. They're variables. They're set up. So what we'll do now, easy enough, we're going to go ahead and say, okay, I want to do this. I want to say, let's multiply green, which is D2. We're going to multiply green multiplied by alpha. And as you, sorry, my battery appears to be dying on my keyboard. That's helpful. So as you type in alpha, X alpha, it's going to come up as an autocomplete, which I just clicked and you can't see. And it comes up. So now you have a direct reference to X alpha, and you can move that anywhere on the sheet that you want in the world, and it's always going to refer back to alpha. Isn't that cool? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Now, what this means is that I can just drag this down, not have to worry about any absolute stuff or whatever, because we already got an absolute reference built in as X alpha. It's pretty neat, guys, I gotta tell you. And then if we do that for green, is for green times beta as well, I'm gonna say green times, I'm gonna type in beta here, and there's X beta. Look at that. We have our other absolute reference that we named for ease of use. And we're done. And now you have that direct reference that never goes away, and you can change those values with abandon. In fact, you can even do something really cool here, which is I can take this thing here, this whole factor reference, and I can move it over here, and nothing changes. Nothing changes because this cell is still named X alpha. You can use this tomorrow. You can use this right now in any spreadsheet that you have. One last thing I want to show you before we call it a day. You can also use the named range to name a literal range. And you can then perform array calculations and sums and stuff on a value, on a named range value, as opposed to some range that you use cells to define. And it's easier for me to show you than tell you, as you can probably tell. So I want to take these numbers. I want to name all this blue. I want to name this the blue range, right? So let's call this blue. Now it's named blue. So now what I can do here is I can say, all right, well, a couple things I can do. So first thing I can do is I can directly cite blue as an array. And once I do that, it pulls in the array. It's pretty cool. The other thing I can do, and it also, by the way, it can also it'll also mirror whatever's going on there. The other thing you can do is you can do sums, which doesn't seem like much. I know that a lot of you do a lot of sophisticated things, but for the sake of understanding how this works, that's pretty cool, right? You can do it either way. You can either do the the whole alt equal trick to grab all that stuff, but it still sums blue because it knows what the range is, and you have a sum of an array that you created with a named range. Anyway, I've showed you a lot of things. I encourage you to take this out there and test it on one of your spreadsheets. Try to integrate some of this stuff there, and maybe there's some other questions you may have or other things you want to learn and see. Hopefully you learned something here. And I'm still a little unsure about what I'm going to do with this channel. Again, I've committed to a year of this, so I'm going to have to come up with topics here and there. I've got a few good ideas, but not quite sure. If this was helpful and you want to see more Excel stuff like this, let me know. I'm happy to open my brain and show you all the stuff that I know and level up your ability to use this platform. The other thing I was thinking about too was doing some kind of a like an office hours type thing where I'll go on a live stream. Y'all can send me your challenges or your ugly ass spreadsheets, whatever you got for me, and I'll go through and show you how you can make things nicer and better and give you some of what I believe to be the best practices for spreadsheets, be they data analysis or reporting or substituting formulas for others. There's a lot of things people do, and they don't realize that you can reduce the complexity of what you're doing with more advanced formulas. Anyway, that's an idea too. So I hope, again, this was helpful. If it was, like and subscribe, because we're going to keep going. We got lots of cool. I have so much stuff to tell you. I have so many things to show you, and I'm glad you're along for the ride. So that's it for me, and até já.